go in and they take people's cattle. I am so saddened by what is happening, but I am motivated to make sure that this stops. And
did you get to read the press release from the BLM after they sold the cows for 27 cents on the dollar?
No, Dennis, but I'm going to hold on to my chair on this one. This is going to be good.
This is the press release written by Joe Lynn Worley, and it's very intriguing. There was a lot of effort put into these 3 paragraphs. You got to really be careful in listening to this. First of all, it says the total amount paid for all the livestock was $27,440. Now we still don't know who bought them, so that doesn't matter. It said the BLM held a lawful sale of impounded livestock this morning after a motion for a temporary restraining order was denied by federal district court. Well, first of all, these are 2 nations, the Shoshone Nation and the U.S. These are 2 separate nations. What are they doing in federal court or district court? That's the last place 2 nations should be. I mean,
especially
if France came to take over Nevada, I doubt very seriously they'd ask Judge McKibben if it's okay. It's not going to happen. That's the first thing. But she puts in there, okay. And it says that the livestock were impounded and trespass on public lands near Team-Oak Reservation lands near the lands. They say the Indians say it was on the lands, they said it was near it. And it said the owners of the livestock lost their grazing permits years ago. A different group of the Team-Oak Indians hold a valid grazing permit for the public lands near the reservation. They have followed grazing regulations for the past 2 years. So now they're saying there's 2 groups. One's paying and one's not. And then listen to this. The impounded action was taken to give relief to the valid permittees. Now, are they saying that because one group didn't pay, they sold their cows for a quarter of what they're worth? Are they going to give it to the other group?
You know, Dennis, I'd like to ask the question, what is the BLM trying to hide? I mean, shouldn't there be openness in government? Did a BLM agent actually buy these cattle for 25 cents on the dollar? Who bought them?
Who bought them?
We certainly have a right to know, and
Absolutely.
It looks very suspicious when they don't come out with actually who the buyer was.
Right.
You know, the BLM just simply doesn't get it. These were not public lands that Raymond Yowell was grazing his cattle on. These were allotments that had private rights attached. Now, I'm going to quote a Supreme Court decision. I want every BLM agent who is watching this to contact their...
Any in town tonight.
No, they're all gone. To contact their solicitor and look up the United States Supreme Court decision called Northern Pacific v. Barden. And that's the case where the highest court in the land, and this is the law of the land, it's never been overturned by that court in whole or in part, decided exactly what Wayne said earlier. And I want to repeat it because I want people to hear this and understand it. Lands that have rights or claims of another attached are not public lands. Now, if those solicitors in Interior want to go argue with the Supreme Court, have at it.
Right.
But that's the law of the land. And they try to define us out of our property rights by trying to redefine the status of this land. Now, in the Hage decision, the judge said these lands had rights that caused them to be fee lands. But that does not mean that those lands that are allotments could not be entered upon for mineral exploration or for recreation, because the state laws that allow for entry for mineral exploration and recreation are still in place.
Right.
And you can have multiple use on these lands so long as you don't destroy the viability of those people who have, through the preemptive clauses in the United States laws and the state laws, taken up settlement, established their rights, paid their taxes. Let me ask you, Dennis, if people have to pay estate taxes on these allotments, and they do, and if they have to pay county taxes on these allotments, taxes from the state's subdivision on these allotments, then what are these taxing entities doing taxing if they don't have private rights attached to these allotments? We're letting them. And you know, today people have to stand up and fight for their private property rights as much as we saw the Patriot fight for the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in that great movie. We're at war, and we've got to win. There's no alternative.
Well, we will win. I've read all the books, from the history books and the Bible, and it's basically good against evil.
That's right.
Good always wins. It's just who gets chewed up in the meantime, I guess. But ultimately, there's only one way that it'll come out. And this kind of thing that went on is evil. This was wrong. It was taking a person's private property, taking their freedom. There's a 72-year-old man out there that is really a beautiful person.
He's fabulous.
He's just such a neat man. 72 years old. They stole his livelihood. They stole everything he had, all of his work. Now, how can anybody do that?
Well, you know, Dennis, you said it earlier. This is evil. And I have to remember back in 1843 when Alexis de Tocqueville came to America. And he said, you know, I looked for the greatness of America. What was the secret to her greatness? And he went through several things. He looked at her Congress. He looked at her great ships and trains in commerce. He looked at the agricultural fields. He looked at the justice, the courts. But it wasn't until he went in the churches. And he understood then that America was great because America is good. But then he said, when America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And you know, it's up to every single one of us, not the government, not your congressman, not your sheriff. We can't even depend on them anymore. But it's up to us to take that stand and fight for our own rights.
We have to.
And the rights of each other.
Right.
You know, there's an interesting thing, Dennis, relative to the situation with Raymond Yall up there, and I've known Raymond virtually all my life. In fact, his grandfather and my grandfather were good friends, and so the families go back a long way. And he is a great person. But there's a very interesting thing about that South Fork Reservation. When that South Fork Reservation was created in the 1930s, in the documents creating that reservation, it said that the Interior Department would have no authority or involvement there at all. BLM is part of Interior. The basic question is, what are they doing there? Now, there's another thing I want to go back to. And that goes back to the aiding and abetting of this theft by sheriffs who were too limp-wristed to exercise their authority.
That's right.
DAs that take a powder when something like this comes down. You know, when Ben Colvin's cattle were stolen here a few months ago?
Yes.
And we looked around for the sheriff and the district attorney in Nye County. You know where they were? Fishing in Alaska until things quieted down. Now, when you've got those kind of people in elected office, you're going to have cases. I asked my sheriff, I said, if you took the same position with the bank over here across the street that you've taken with the livestock industry here in the county, and if you let it be known that a certain class of people could rob that bank anytime they wanted to, how long do you think it'd be till it was robbed? And robbed repeatedly. And I said, that's exactly what you're doing with the livestock industry. You have told them you're not going to involve yourself. Now, on the other hand, when we look around the West and we find a few sheriffs, and the first one that comes to mind is Gary Amon up there in Hawaii County, Idaho.
Right.
Sheriff Keller in Clark County. Clark County is an urban county. The BLM doesn't push them around.
Right.
And all they have done is exercise their lawful jurisdiction. The Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, do not have jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is defined as the right to exercise civil and criminal process that vests in the state and the subdivision. And yet we see some of these sheriffs allowing the BLM, like this guy over here, putting on a gun and a badge and claiming to be a law enforcement officer.
Right.
Let me tell you, they have no lawful jurisdiction. They don't, and this will be challenged and be challenged constitutionally, but how many people have to be ground up? And when is it going to be when one of these nervous Nellies that's wearing a gun, and believe me, I'm deputized myself in Nye County, and I've stopped some of these people and talked to them. And I'll tell you, I've seen some that are so close to the fringe. In fact, I have to believe that they pick those kind of people because they're pushing for an incident. And so, yes, they're dangerous because they're so unstable.
Yeah. Does it appear to you, and I've always said it looks like they're trying to pick a fight?
Well, obviously they are. They have pushed and pushed and pushed, you know, going in and stealing somebody's cattle. You know, they're thinking to themselves, how far do we have to push this until we get the fight we want? And we can really make all these people look bad. When they came in and took my cattle in 1991, and of course, we've been in discovery with the Forest Service, first people to the best of my knowledge that have ever put them in what is called full discovery, with no limits. We got documents that you couldn't believe. But we've got documents, their own emails, etc., that showed that they were pushing for an incident. They had picked the time and the place. They had snipers set up on the hills, because I was supposed to go in there and create a big fuss and start a ruckus, and they'd have an opportunity to do me in, and they were going to get that on the evening news. The purpose was to make all the ranchers in the West look bad, because the next day the Senate was going to vote on raising the grazing fee on these lands to a level that nobody could afford it, and they'd get rid of all the ranchers.
Get them all gone.
So we know that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's so obvious. I mean, look at the Holmgren situation now. The threats are out that they're going to come and take their cattle, and they have never even been given an impound or a notice of impound. But yet
no due process.
Right, and right here, the rest of this horrid thing from this press release, it says right here, the BLM followed its administrative process in giving the owners of the livestock notice they were in trespass, notice of intent to impound their livestock, and notice of intent to sell their livestock. Administrative process is a very specific process. And most people reading that says, well, apparently they followed the law. No, they didn't. They followed an administrative procedure, and nobody challenged it because they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Well, let me tell you something that I think might be interesting, that I happen to know and my wife knows. But we know for a fact that Raymond Yowell has challenged them on every one of their points and asked them to rebut, and they have acknowledged that he is correct. Now, I'll tell you, when this gets to the proper court, and it will, there's going to be a lot of these lower level bureaucrats, but that's the way the agencies operate. They'll throw those people to the wolves.
Right.
If those people end up with a big fine against them, or if they end up doing jail time or whatever, that's okay, because those people down there in the lower level of the BLM and Forest Service are
expendable.
They're expendable.
Right.
And so they don't really mind if they get taken down. But I'll tell you that Raymond has the documents in his hip pocket, and I've seen them, and he has them in default. They have admitted to everything that he has charged them with.
But yet they still went in, stole his cows, sold them, tried their best to injure this man.
Let me tell you something. From my own experience, and I think I probably have as much experience with this as just about anybody. I've been in court with
you
them
started this whole thing
for 11 years now, and we've never lost a round with them. But I will tell you this, that we have found in our litigation that it is that same ignorance, blindness, determination to follow the wrong course in these agencies that has been the biggest asset we have had in winning in the courts. Because the bureaucrats and the environmentalists, they've come to believe their own propaganda. And when you get them in court, in law, That term has a specific meaning. But when you get them in a court in law, they don't have anything to stand on.
Right.
And that's what we were able to do. We were in trial for 10 days on the property phase of this issue. In those 10 days, the United States never prevailed on one minor point. And in 10 days of trial, we never failed on one minor point. And so, and it wouldn't have happened if the BLM and the Forest Service hadn't gone out and done these extreme things.
Right.
So you can turn around and use it to your advantage, and I'm sure Raymond Yowell is going to do that before it's over.
I think so too. Watching this man just sit back and know that he's going to win this thing, even though they had just chopped him off at the knees. It was just amazing.
The sad thing, though, Dennis, is that actions like this on the part of the federal government, like the action in my district at Ruby Ridge with Randy Weaver and his family, the actions at Waco, the force of the federal government to take life, liberty, and property shocks the sensibilities of the average American. And I know that Raymond will win. But, you know, we just have to keep people together and not let them get discouraged, because, you know, we've been in worse circumstances in this country and we've pulled through. But the thing is that because we won World War II, people trust the government.
Right.
And you know, we want to be able to trust our government. In fact, our founders said the purpose of our government is to keep the peace and tranquility of the communities. Right. And they are doing just the opposite. And in fact, when I was in Congress, I personally held 3 hearings on whether the federal agencies had law enforcement authority. And they don't. They don't have the authority that they appear to have unless a sheriff deputizes them under FLIPMA and under his own authority. Congress has never conferred that kind of law enforcement authority on the agencies. In fact, it's a breach of the separation of powers.
Absolutely.
And we established that in our hearings, and here they continue on.
But how come you can't take that information and throw it back at them?
Well, reason doesn't matter to them anymore. I think that, you know, we're just going to have to continue to win in court to the degree, and shows like yours, which keep people informed as to what their rights really are, such as the rights that the rancher has on the public lands. I've got to tell you something Wayne didn't say about this 10-day phase of oral argument on his case. The government kept standing up and talking about the public lands, and Wayne's lawyer would object every time, and the judge always ruled with Wayne's lawyers, and time again the federal government kept referring to these allotments of the Hage Ranch as being public lands, and again his lawyers would stand up and say, Your Honor, public lands are not in dispute here. Finally, the judge had to threaten the government to sanction them if they kept using the term public lands. And that is such a key to understanding this whole dilemma. So in addition to understanding what the public lands are, we've got to realize that unless the sheriff is deputizing these federal agents, they don't have the law enforcement authority. In fact, they are violating Nevada law by impersonating law enforcement officers. If you and I put a gun on and a policeman type uniform and went out and tried to act like a law enforcement officer, guess what would happen to us? Well, they must, and they are under the same kind of law that we are. They are not exempt from it.
But they are not aware of that. And then an incident happened on Thursday out there. There was a good group of demonstrators came out, and they were peaceful, and we had a little press conference and said our thing. And then it kind of broke up. There was no deputies, anybody came around until the dust started on the road and people were leaving, and there was like 4 or 5 of us still left there, and here comes a sheriff deputy down the road, and we thought, great, he's going to stop and see how everything is, and we'll tell him fine. He went right to the BLM, and I had a camera on it, I had a camera going, on him, and he stopped right with the BLM people. I mean, this is our county sheriff, and asked them if we behaved ourselves. And that's the mentality of the sheriff, and it's wrong. And it offended those of us who were there.
It's aiding and abetting the crime.
Exactly.
And as long as you have sheriffs that, again, are too limp-wristed to exercise their lawful jurisdiction and authority. I know here several years ago, I was asked to speak to the Western States Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And there was a sheriff from one of the Nevada counties came up to me and he said, I'm having all this trouble with the Forest Service, this, that, something else. And I listened to him and I said, well, what you're going to have to do is exercise your lawful jurisdiction. You have the jurisdiction. You're the chief law enforcement officer in the county. The Forest Service has no law enforcement authority. You need to understand that and let them know it. That'll take care of your problem.
Right.
You know, he would never do that. He never would do it. The end result was the stealing of Raymond Yowell's cattle. Okay? And where we have seen sheriffs that do nothing more than send them a simple letter and say, boys, I'm the sheriff. I'm the chief law enforcement officer in this county. Mm-hmm. And there's not going to be any impoundments, any theft of property on your part. If any of that is done, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it with a lawful court order or warrant. And if you have a problem in this county, you come to us with a court order or warrant, we'll serve it for you. But don't you go around acting like law enforcement officers, because you're not. And where we've had sheriffs do that, such as Clark County, such as Owyhee County in southern Idaho, and there's some in Utah, there's one in Wyoming, one up in Wyoming where the sheriff put him in chains, took it to the 10th Circuit to get him, and the 10th Circuit upheld him and said he did just what he had the right to do.
Right.
So if we can put people in office or get these ones in office to stiffen their backbone enough to exercise their lawful authority, this stuff will end.
Right.
Because where the sheriff stands up, this stuff ends. But where the sheriff is willing to aid and abet the crime, and the brand department, Nevada State Brand Department,
and this was
aiding and abetting the crime.
Yeah.
And that's another entity that's going to have to be dealt with, and I think those people that were party to that are going to be dealt with personally. I know a little bit about some of the actions that are developing at the present time.
Yeah, that was totally, completely wrong. I mean, a brand is a trademark. It says, this is mine. And the brand inspector went right along with the administrative process. I mean, what is that? I guess my question is, why won't they stand up? I've actually talked to sheriffs and deputies that do, in fact, know this. But yet they go along.
Let me give you an answer to that, Dennis, because my wife and I have been around the country quite a bit giving seminars. We run into this type of thing. One of the main reasons why sheriffs, brand departments, other state entities will cave in and aid and abet the crimes, which are really the crimes being perpetrated by the National Wildlife Federation, the Natural Resource Defense Council, and Sierra Club. You have to remember the Forest Service and BLM are just the people doing the dirty work down here in the ground. But the reason why that happens is when you find those sheriffs that won't stand up, that continually cave in, you'll usually find a sheriff that's been taking federal grants.
Right.
And in other words, his sheriff's department is on the welfare roll. Yeah. Or the county itself has been taking federal grants, and we don't want to offend the federal agencies. We might not get the next grant. And so what they do is throw their own basic industry to the wolves. And in Nye County, Nevada, the impact of the Forest Service alone on grazing in Nye County over the last 13 years is right around $120 million loss of economic activity in Nye County. And those are very good figures put together by an entity that was called in to do a study on Nye County some years back, and they've kept updating them. I talked to the guy that did that research the other day. The impact on the state of Nevada is enormous. That's why you can drive through Tonopah today and you'll see more buildings boarded up than are open.
It's awful.
Because the economy's been destroyed. And who destroyed it? BLM and Forest Service marching to the drum of National Resources Defense Council,
right,
National Wildlife Federation, and Sierra Club,
Right.
aided and abetted by an attorney general that marches to the same tune,
Yeah.
and sheriffs that have been
That
bought off
will
with
not
welfare.
do his job. That's simple. And I've talked to, but look what happens to them. Even when they do, Richie Mack's a good friend. He challenged them. They came to him and says, "You will do that," and he went back at them and said, "No, I won't. Here's why," and took it to federal court, or took it right to the Supreme Court and won. What did he win? Nobody knows about it. The court essentially said the Brady bill is unconstitutional. Well, they're still doing it. They're still doing it. And then he comes back for re-election, and the big boys pour tons of money in this tiny little Arizona county to just demonize Richie. And pretty soon, he's out of a job. He's paid for all the court costs. He lost his home. He lost basically everything material, but he never lost his spirit.
You know, one thing else that he gained out of that, he gained the satisfaction of maintaining a clear conscience, doing what was right. And we have to remember that throughout the history of this nation, it was people that were willing to put it all on the line, that took some real heavy hits personally, is the only reason that we have a semblance of a free society today. And it's going to take the same kind of people with the same kind of courage and faith and commitment and the ability to understand what is right.
Well, I know,
and to do what is right.
We've got two of you right here.
Well, here's a lady right here that can tell you about money being raised against her to try to take her out because she stood for what was right. She beat him, and beat him big time.
Wonderful.
Well, you know, Richard Mack is like those men who signed the Declaration of Independence. Oh, they pledged their lives, their fortune, their sacred honor. And, you know, Richard Mack has become a national institution.
Right.
But he may have lost an election, but he didn't lose his sacred honor.
No, and he is benefiting from it spiritually, and I know him, and it's powerful. And it was a pleasure not too long ago. I got to see Randy. Well, he spoke where you were, and it's amazing that he can come forward. And like Richie said up there, and I feel the same way. If somebody had shot my wife and my son in the back, I don't know that I could have maintained. I'm afraid they'd have had to take me as I'm trying to get to them. And so how he managed to do that is absolutely amazing. And there's more people like that at various levels. But if people would realize, but it takes, they have to have their own ox gored before they react. But yet, it's going on every day. The stealing of Raymond Yowell's cows affects everybody in this room and everybody watching. And that's what we can't seem to get through to them.
You know, what you say is so right, Dennis, because I want to tell you something. If they can come in, the argument that they have used to steal Raymond Yowell's cattle, I want to tell you, if that argument is justifiable, then that same argument can be used to take the bank account or the stock and bond portfolio or the home on Main Street of anybody in the country.
Right.
And it's kind of the case is, oh, well, that's Raymond Yowell. He's an Indian up there on the reservation and, you know, a rancher out there. Who really cares about him? What they need to understand, again, is if the BLM was justified with their argument in doing what they did to Raymond, that very same argument is justification for taking anybody's property, regardless of what it is, or where you live.
Yeah. We have one more clip, Brendan. This is basically, I saw this a sign out there, and since the BLM wouldn't be here, we thought we would go ahead and deliver their message. Brendan, if you'd put that up. This was the mentality out there. Submit to federal demands or the cow gets it. That is the whole message that they were sending out there. That's how they think. And it's really sad, and I'm sorry, but that struck me when I saw that as being very ironic. They're holding cows hostage, just like they said. You said they can hold bank accounts, they can hold anything they want. And so, if people will realize this, we're running out of time, and we got a lot of questions and answers to go, so we're going to have to get out of here and go off the air, but I'd like to ask if you'll both stick around for a little bit and answer some questions for the audience we have here. And
Certainly.
And there's a lot more discussion I'd